Hello, everyone. So we're going to start on the nervous system today. Hopefully you have your notes ready to go and that you are going to be writing in all the information provided. Okay, so today we're going to start on the nervous system. Part one, we're also going to do part two at the same time, so be ready to take notes on both sections. Okay, so at this point, you're going to actually, you have a diagram of the brain in your packet. So you are going to be using that, and you're going to be using the information here to actually label your cerebrum, your cerebellum, your spinal cord, your brainstem, and the thalamus and hypothalamus. And you're going to use this to label yours. And then what you're going to do is pick colors for the different sections. You don't have to pick the colors here, you can pick different colors and color those sections and then describe what they do by looking through your textbook. So you're going to pause the presentation here. Okay, so as we talk about the nervous system, one of the things that we have to understand is that we need to communicate with the different parts of our body. Communication is a team activity, and every single part of our body acts as a team in order to succeed in any daily activities that we take. So if you understand the way teams work, you know that the better the team works, the more successful they tend to be. So the same thing with our body. If our body works together, we are very successful. Those of you that are very well coordinated understand that the more coordinated you are, the better you are at sports. Okay, so the nervous system controls and coordinates functions throughout the body and responds to internal and external stimuli. So what a stimulus is anything that basically warrants some kind of response from your body. So if someone's yelling at you from across the field and you can't hear anything and you can't see them, they're not going to warrant a stimulus. But if you see someone yelling at you, even if you can't hear them, it starts a stimulus, and you kind of look at them and take note of what they're trying to tell you, because that's it may not be, they may be yelling but you may not be able to hear them, but you can see them, so it starts a stimulus and you could notice it. So anything could be a stimulus, any whether it's visual or something you can touch, so that triggers our nervous system. Okay, so the parts of the nervous system that are the most important are the brain, the spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves. And we've divided the whole nervous system into these sections. Basically, their function and their purpose is to recognize and coordinate the body's response to changes in their internal and external environments, and basically act as the communication system for our body. So the brain, spinal cord, as well as the peripheral nerves work together in order to keep our body parts communicating with each other. As you listen to this lesson, I want you to think of examples of messages being transmitted from your body to your brain or vice versa as you take notes, as you listen to this. What's being triggered? What's the stimulus that you're getting? Is it just to your ears, your drums, or is there stuff happening in your brain? Are you paying attention to something else? Or you may be moving a body part, or you may be feeling your seat. If you're sitting down, do you feel your legs? What do you feel? Are you like playing around with your pen? Whatever it is that you're doing, I want you to think about some examples of how your nervous system is communicating right now. So the nervous system is made out of these little cells called neurons. A neuron is a cell that carries the message throughout the nervous system. Nervous tissue is made up of neurons, and here you have a real picture of some neurons that make up the nervous system. Okay, so in your packet, you have this. It's kind of the wrong orientation, so it's standing on its end in your paper. So you have to label it kind of looking sideways. But you're going to basically write down the nucleus, the cell body, the myelin sheath, the axon terminals, the nodes, the axons, and the dendrites. The axons on yours are facing down. So it kind of, I want you to label it and then right now so you know the parts that we're going to be talking about and describing right now. Okay, so the cell body part of the neuron is contains the nucleus and cytoplasm, and basically is the center of metabolic activity. What it means is that it's where basically nutrients come in and it's turned into energy that basically is used to run that cell. Okay, so dendrites carry impulses from the environment or other exons towards the cell body. In other words, the dendrites is where the stimulus starts, where the information comes in. So that's the imports. Okay, so like the ends. Okay, the axon is basically the long tail or long fiber that carries the impulse away from the cell body. So we have our axon the axons that are basically connected to the other parts, and they carry the impulse away from the cell body towards like an end point. So it's carrying that impulse that comes in through the dendrites. It travels to the through the axon away from the cell body. So it's an outport. If you have a charger, it basically is the long part of the charger. If you can basically think of a neuron as a charger. It has they've modeled it after neurons. So many of our appliances and phone chargers are a great example. Dendrites would be like the plug into the wall. And then you have the axon would be the long part that connects to your phone. Um, and the body would be like the chunk part of the phone charger, if you will. Okay. Continuing on, the myelin sheath is basically um, if insulating membrane that surrounds the axon. So if you go back to the analogy of the charger, it's basically a charger. The charger inside of the wire, the long wire that connects to your phone, there's basically wire, and it's surrounded in plastic. So the energy stays inside and it doesn't go anywhere else. Well, in our body, our neurons are basically insulated by these cells that are fatty, and they basically make sure that the message stays in the neuron, so it does not travel anywhere else, and it could be really efficient. Okay. The nodes are the gaps between the myelin sheath. They help the impulse travel down the neuron faster. So, as a matter of fact, our neurons are even better than your chargers and they're so much faster than a charger because the myelin sheath is not a solid covering. It has little gaps because if you go back and look at the picture right there, the myelin sheath is just made out of individual cells. And I'm going to show you how it is that the reason why we are able to basically move so much faster than a phone charger is because our this the synapse, the stimulus and the whole transfer of information down the neuron is basically traveling and skipping over the sections of the axon that are covered in myelin. So myelin cells, so it's able to move faster. And I'll describe that a little more later. Okay. At the end of the neuron, you get axon terminals, hence the word terminals. It's like the end. Branches at the end of the axon through which the nerve impulse leaves the nerve. So it's the output. So this is where you would basically connect to your phone. Okay, so there's three kinds of neurons classified according to the direction in which an impulse travels. So we've got sensory neurons. They carry impulses from the sense organs to the spinal cord and brain. So this is like information coming in. So this would be like anything that like your eyes, your hands, anything that comes into your system, any neuron associated with bringing information into your brain and spinal cord, those are called sensory neurons. Hence, your senses are named after them. Okay, we've got motor neurons. They carry impulses from the spinal cord and brain to muscles and glands. So these are like the stuff that basically sends a message back out. So someone slaps you, you respond by crying or getting angry and punching back. I don't know, like a response. So motor neurons would be like the movement. So you see someone coming at you with a knife, running away would be what the motor neurons might want you to do, or maybe grab another knife and challenge them, or basically hide. So that would be your motor neuron. So the sensory would be like, I see, a bad man coming at me with a knife or whatever, and then you hide. That would be the response from the motor neurons. So basically, your brain and spinal cord basically decided to do that, and your glands started producing adrenaline that allows you to move your muscles faster, so you get away or hide or fight. Okay. And then we've got interneurons. They connect the sensory and motor neurons and carry impulses between them. So basically, it's the interneurons are what's in between the sensory and motor neurons that allows them to communicate. Write this down. So if you were to write this down really fast, this is basically a reflex, quick automatic response to a stimulus. Many of us have gone to the doctor and they want to see if your nervous system's working right. So they basically hit you with a little hammer in the knee, and then it's not that you're not able to, like right now, all of us can kick our, we could kick our legs. But if you see this happening, this is a reflex is basically you there there's certain sections of our body that are not connected to our brain. We have certain neurons that are not connected to the brain that I just go as far as the central of the spinal cord. Well, our spinal cord can't think, and we're not really aware of our spinal cord sometimes. So there's certain commands in our spinal cord that we don't have to think about. Kicking our leg when we get hit by a hammer in a certain part of our knee, that's one of them. So moving out your knee up, you get your sensor receptor that basically feels the hit in that particular section of your knee, and that basically sends a message off, and you create a reflex arc. So a reflex arc is the pathway that impulses travel for a reflex. So it would be the numbered in one in your in the diagram here. We've got one, two, sensory stretch, three, sensory neuron, uh, four. What? They were missing a four. So we have five motor neurons, cell body neuron and ganglial root ganglion. And then motor neuron tells your body to basically kick. Okay. Oh, there we are. Four, five, four, six, and seven. They're not labeled, but that's where everything goes. Okay. So how the body reflexes respond to stimulus? It's how your body will basically sometimes you have certain things that you do. A good example would be like when you think someone's coming at you, blinking would kind of be one of those things. Also, there's all kinds of things that our body does do just because of reflex. Okay, so the reflex arc, basically you get a stimulus, the sensor receptor, the sensory neuron gets that information. The interneuron then gets that information. The interneuron that is not in your brain carries it over to the motor neuron. The motor neuron basically tells the muscle, which is called the effector, to do something. And that's how the whole thing works with reflex arcs. A nerve impulse. So, what is an impulse? An impulse is a message or stimuli sent by a neuron. That's it. It's anything that will stimulate a neuron. Okay, so what's a stimulus? A signal to which an organism responds. So stimulus from the senses to the brain, touch of a hot stove, turning on the lights or turning off the lights. Um, the response to the brain tells the muscles to contract to pull your hand away from the hot stove. So if you've ever done that, try to touch something hot, your hand automatically like just kind of goes away from it without really thinking. You don't really put a lot of thought into it. You're like, hot, pull away, or curling iron, hot curling iron, pull away. It would be bad. Um, a brain tells the pupils, in the case of turning off the lights, your brain tells your pupils to dilate, get big, so you can see better in the dark. So when your pupils dilate, they basically they open up and allow more light in, and so that allows you to see better and not at night. Now, if you keep your pupils open, if you've ever had your eyes dilated for whatever reason, it's really hard to see sometimes, and everything's out of focus because your pupils they're used to just opening and closing depending on how much light there is available for them all the time automatically for you. So, when you dilate them, you force them open, they just relax and they're letting all the light in. And if it's a really, really sunny day, it hurts you so much because you might be staring at a light and you can't basically close the uh, you can't close up, and so winds up happening is that you wind up damaging cornea or anything like that, and it really does hurt. Okay. A stimulus excites the nerve endings, dendrites, which sends the impulse like an electrical current through the neuron. The impulse travels through the neuron from the dendrite to the cell body to the axon and out the axon terminal. And once it reaches the axon terminal, it basically sends out these chemicals called neurotransmitters that basically relate the messages to the next neuron. If you have enough neurotransmitters released from one neuron to the next, it'll carry that information to the next one and start the whole thing again. So this next part is We're going to talk about how we stimulate the neuron, how neurons in detail. Okay, so when there's no impulse traveling through a neuron, it's got what's called the resting potential. It's basically an electrical charge across the membrane of a resting neuron. When it's at rest, the inside of a neuron is negative and the outside is positive. That's when a neuron is not being used. When it's at rest, this is how it is. It's negative on the inside. Everything outside of it is positive. And that means that that neuron is not working right now. It's just relaxing. So here you've got a graphic and it shows you that this neuron is at rest because inside of it is negative. So this neuron is resting right now. It's called the resting potential. So, a moving impulse is when a neuron receives an impulse from the environment or from another neuron. The impulse must travel strong enough to stimulate a response, like a domino effect. So, I don't know if you've ever tried to like set up dominoes. If you don't place them just right, one might fall and not hit the next one. And if one falls and the other one's too far or it doesn't hit hard enough, it won't drop the next one and your whole thing will fail. So it'll stop dropping at that point. So you have to make sure you put the dominoes close enough in order to make sure that you get a strong enough it's strong enough to stimulate the next thing happening. So if you like don't put them right, they wind up falling and it just stops in the middle of it because you have not put them close enough. Well, like a domino effect, if you don't if there's not enough happening, it will not keep on sending the response. So it might not travel where you need it to travel. So, an action potential, aka a nerve impulse. So, action potential is when you're actually using the neuron. The action potential moves down the neuron from the dendrite to an axon, then to the synapse. So, this is a case not when you didn't get enough information, you missed. This is when you actually feel someone. You actually get information. So, the action potential moves down from the dendrite to the axon, then to the synapse, where the rapid reversal of charges goes from negative to positive. So, in order to get a message to the neuron, the inside of the neuron, that section needs to get positive. So, if you remember back, when it's at rest, it's negative inside. Well, when it's actually being stimulated, it turns positive. So here you got figure 35-7, an impulse. At rest, you see the inside of the neuron, it is negative. The outside's positive, but the inside's negative. So B, sodium, which is positive, ions flow in, the action potential occurs. So when the little channels open, they allow sodium in. While sodium's positive, that makes that section positive. So it's that little section of neuron is no longer negative. It is positive. But you'll notice that the rest of it hasn't turned positive. Only a little part of it turned positive. Well, what happens then and you see here in C, as the action potential passes, potassium gates open and potassium ions flow out. So notice the potassium ions are also positive. So even though the sodium is positive inside, the sodium keep leaks into the next part. Well, as that's happening, potassium is leaked out of the part that just got turned positive. When the potassium leaves, it turns the inside back negative. So the only positive part is the where it's going. So it moves along the neuron uh, from section to section. You'll see the sodium channels on the neighboring section turn on, and the potassium channels right after the sodium channels turn on, making it negative again. So D, the action potential continues to move along the axon in the direction of the nerve impulse. So you'll see the sodium channels are now open on the very end of your picture here on the right side, and then the part that originally got stimulated is now back to normal. The other part, the middle part, is now leaking potassium, making it basically negative, starting to make it negative again. And then over here, the sodium channels are basically becoming positive again inside. This animation's very old, but it shows you exactly how it all works. Okay, action potential moves down the neuron from the dendrite to the axon, then to the synapse. So on the you can either look at the action potential as the inside starting off negative and turning positive, or you can see the outside starting off positive and becoming negative for a little set time. So you could look at it from the inside of the dendrite, the inside of the neuron. It starts off negative every time because at rest it's negative, and then it turns positive. You can also see the outside. It starts off positive and it turns negative for a little while. So that's basically the way this one shows it also. Okay, the synapse is a gap between the axon terminal of one neuron and another cell through which the impulse travel is transferred. For example, the axon terminal of one neuron ends and the dendrite of another neuron ends. In a couple of slides, you're going to see a picture of the synapse. The synapse is the little gap between the one neuron and another neuron. And they fit very well together, but there's still a little bit of a gap. That is the synapse, where they meet, but they don't touch. Neurotransmitters are basically the chemicals released from the axon terminals that cause, if enough of them get released or secreted from the axon terminals, that can actually start an action potential in a neighbor cell. So if it's connected to another neuron, so it's if you've ever seen a relay, um, you basically run, you pass the baton to the next person in the relay, and that one runs and passes the baton. Well, if there's a chance that you might drop the baton, and that would basically disqualify you from the relay, and you'd lose. So in this case, neurotransmitters would be the baton. And so a neuron is stimulated, and if it gets to the end, it'll pass neurotransmitters to the next one. And if there's enough neurotransmitters, the next cell neuron will start basically action potential, and so that's how the information gets passed on to another place. Okay, so the big picture in the middle, that one is basically this is one little, if you look at the little picture, it tells you what's big magnified. So if you look at the picture at the bottom left of your screen, you see that the axon and the axon terminals of cell number one. And you see that little box where they're not touching, they're almost touching. It's kind of like they're just like right in there in the little groove. The if the action potential has reached the axon terminal, it basically starts releasing these little vesicles filled with neurotransmitters. And in the dendrites of the second cell are basically receiving these neurotransmitters in these little basically protein channels. They attach to them a lot, opening them up so sodium can come in and turn that part positive inside. And then that will, if enough of those get triggered, then you'll start another action potential in the neighbor cell. Okay, so very quickly reviewing again. So the nervous system is divided into the brain, the spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves. Their function is to the communication of your body. The basic units of the nervous system are neurons, cells that carry the messages throughout the body system. They're basically the parts are dendrites, cell body, axon, and axon terminals. A nerve impulse is like an electrical current that travels through the neuron to transmit the signal, action potential, as the impulse travels through the neuron, rapidly reversing the electrical charge along the neuron. Remember, it's negative and then it turns positive really quickly in sections at a time. And it's basically an all or nothing response. Either it's going to happen or it doesn't happen. It's not like, it happened a little bit. No, it's the once you start if a single part of the dendrite starts turning positive on the inside from negative, it'll carry the impulse. So it'll start the whole thing. All you needed to get is one little section to become positive on the inside, and it starts. You can't stop it. And finally, the synapse. It's basically the place where the neuron makes contact with another cell to transmit the impulse. It is a little gap, and that's where the neurotransmitters are being released to hopefully cause some kind of reaction.